I'm not an expert in anything, but that's never stopped me from having an opinion. So here's my 2 cents.
Please be a good argument. Please be a good argument.
I think Scripture came first, and here's why.
Oh my God, bro.
Long before Jesus ever showed up on the scene, long before he ever established the ecclesia, the church, we had the Old Testament. All of the Old Testament writings, the law and the prophets, everything that Jesus himself considered Scripture and that everybody considered Scripture, it was already there. So right there, Scripture came first.
How in the world did the church already have the Scriptures when various groups of the Jews themselves even debated on what those Scriptures were? For instance, the Pharisees, they accepted the Torah, the prophets, the writings. But the Sadducees, on the other hand, they only accepted the Torah and they rejected the prophets and the writings. This is why if you go to Acts chapter 23, verses 6 through 8, we read, "But when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, 'Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am being judged.' And when he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For Sadducees say there is no resurrection and no angel or spirit, but the Pharisees confess both." So this narrative that at the time of Christ, everybody just knew what the Scriptures were is just false. How we know what the Scriptures are is because of a normative authority. Christ, God in the flesh. This is what he says in Luke chapter 24, verse 45. It says, "And he opened their understanding that they might comprehend the Scriptures." What Scriptures? Go back a couple verses, verse 44. "Then he said to them," this is the disciples, these are the words which I spoke to you while I was still with you, that all things must be fulfilled which are written in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms concerning me." So Christ didn't go around and just say, "Hey, well, you guys figure it out. You guys can figure out what the Scripture is." No, Christ, being the normative authority, told us exactly what it was. He didn't just leave it up to our own interpretation or just leave it up to our own understanding to just quote unquote figure it out. Let us do our own thing.
As for the New Testament writings, long before any councils showed up and canonized the Scriptures, the early church, like the early church, they already considered the writings of the apostles as Holy Scripture inspired by God. They already knew that they were being given Scripture by God in that time before the councils showed up and compiled them and canonized them.
Yeah, but you're presupposing a bunch of stuff because there's no book in the Bible that tells you what list of books goes in the Bible. It just says Scripture. Okay. Well, okay. What Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? Is that Scripture? What about Zechariah? Because it just says prophets. Or what about it doesn't give you the exact list of books that go in the Bible. You need the authority of the church to tell you what that is, as we just explained prior in the previous video that I gave. But here's a question I have for you. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 3 through 8, Paul is quoting a creed, and he writes this in between 48 to 55 AD, as scholars say. This is the pre-Pauline creed, and it says that Christ died, was buried, and was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures. Ironically, right? That was written anywhere between 48 to 55 AD. But the scripture you quoted in 2 Peter about Paul's writings being authoritative, that was written anywhere between 64 to 68 AD. So hold on a second. If the Scripture is the final authority, because I'm not going to straw man your position, because I know that Sola Scriptura believes that the Scriptures and church history, or the authority of the church, they play hand in hand, but the Bible is the final authority. Well, how can the Bible be the final authority if all of the Bible wasn't written at the time of Christ? So here's a question for you. In this, 15, 16, 17-year gap, what was the church, how did the church function without the complete list of Scripture? Oh, well, they're quoting this pre-Pauline creed. Even Paul is quoting this creed that predates even his apostleship. So the oral tradition of the church is what governs Paul. He writes that. And then Peter confirms him. So hold on a second. So how did the church operate for that 15 years if the complete list of Scripture wasn't even written as yet? Well, this is why 1 Timothy 3, verse 15 says, "But if I am delayed, I write so that you may know how you ought to conduct yourself in the house of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and ground of the truth. In the King James Version, it says the pillar and ground of truth. It's the same thing. So hold on a second. The scripture, which you say is the final authority, is telling you itself that it is not the final authority. It says that the church is the pillar and ground of truth. You ground truth, you ground what is right to believe through the church, not through the scriptures. Because scripture requires somebody to interpret it. You can't have a text without an interpreter. That makes no sense. And the interpreter of the scriptures is the church. I mean, imagine this. Let's say that you have like something like the U.S. Constitution. Everybody has a copy of the U.S. Constitution in their back pocket. And I argue with you about what this particular article means. Like nobody would ever know what it actually means. There is a governmental body that interprets and legislates as an authoritative means as to how you know how to interpret and use the U.S. Constitution. It's called the Supreme Court. There's an actual body that does that. For us, the body that governs the scriptures, that interprets the scriptures and lets us know how they ought to be understood is the church. This is why Jesus says in Luke chapter 10, verse 16, he who hears you hears me. He who rejects you rejects me, and he who rejects me rejects him who sent me. So Christ established and set up the church on the apostles. The apostles taught their disciples taught their disciples, so forth and so on. And we have the writings of these people through the church. They're called church fathers. And we have the councils that have this is how the church has always operated and worked, even according to Acts 15. So it's just not a good position for you guys to hold when you just try to remove the church itself from how it historically operated.
So I would say scripture came first.
Yeah, I don't think so.